Ukrainian nation is a bit, let's say, there are some specific things about us. And one of the most important things that we were skeptical about anyone in the office of president or in the office of the prime minister. Because before that, in our history, we've been occupied either by the Soviet Union or Moscow, and actually the Russian rule, but communist rule. And before that, it was in Russian Empire. So Ukrainians were skeptical and suspicious about anyone who gets into the office. And, we're not happy with any president the next day he is elected. I'm in Kiev, so I haven't been living in Kiev as far as 40 kilometers. So I've witnessed some drastic moments of our history, but fortunately I'm safe and sound here, and nothing terrible happened to my loved ones. If I compare my fate in my story to millions of Ukrainians who are abroad or unfortunately who has been killed by the Russians, certainly I'm better off than the average Ukrainian.
Alexander, can we also pause at this moment, this juncture, to reflect on the Ukrainian government as well? We've talked a lot about the response of the West, and we will. I've got a couple of other points to make on that, a couple of other questions to ask you on that in a moment. But led, of course, by Volodymyr Zelensky, and the Ukrainian government handling of this war. As somebody who has sort of been at the heart of government in the way that you have, Alexander, who watches these things as closely as you do, how would you assess this year?
Well, first of all, I should say that I was a bit skeptical about President Zelensky before this full-fledged invasion, because even though I wanted for him, for the reasons that I didn't want Ukrainian democracy to be more Russian style with the authoritarian, let's say, movement of the previous president, but I was skeptical about his ability to cope with the Russian threat, because he was, a bit, he sounded a bit naive that he can approach Putin and negotiate some acceptable solution for Ukraine. Certainly, I spent more than 20 years in the government and the related to government affairs things. So I do not believe any word of Russia. That's why I was skeptical about it. But his words that no, we need ammo, not a right. It was absolutely a turning point of history for Ukraine and possibly for Europe as well. So he decided that this challenge is up to him, and whatever happens to him personally, to his family, that he is going to fight for Ukraine, and it's absolutely amazing thing. And possibly his background as the actor and even as comedian, it was absolutely amazing. He used to the full of all his talents and gifts to convey Ukrainian people to unite, then to our partners that there is a reason to support Ukraine in this struggle. So he is driving the nation, and even though there are some people who are criticizing him for his pro-Russian views before this invasion, but he United Nations, and I haven't heard any words of criticism about him. If we're talking about the rest of the government, and particularly the Minister of Defense, and I still have some friends who work there, there is a criticism, and there was a recent scandal, corruption scandal, but it was more about the scandal rather than real corruption in the ministry. So they're doing a great job in the war, reforming how the ministry is operating, how it's supporting the armed forces with everything they need, and possibly after the president, Minister of Defense, Mr. Reznikov, is the second most popular figure in Ukraine, and it says a lot because before that, previous ministers were criticized for, let's say, the red ribbons, the backed work and some other things that are not making efficient efforts to strengthen the, let's say, defenses of Ukraine. But now, even though there is still some criticism in general, and particularly the economical bloc of Ukrainian government, but surely it's not. You cannot compare it to the one that was before the invasion. So overall, they are doing pretty good job. Certainly, we would be more critical to them after our victory, because we believe that Ukraine need to change completely political system and to unleash the let's say freedom spirit of Ukrainians and their say in the governmental affairs, because before that there were some let's say tendencies that are not really good for Ukraine, like the government was deep in the gap between the people and the government. But now we see that there is a unity, and it's not just words of propaganda. I've just you can ask any even opposition leaders. They are struggling for power, which is good, but they do not criticize the government to such a degree that it used to be before.
Yeah, and I suppose that's. I mean, you've pointed to it there, haven't you, Alexander? One of Volodymyr Zelensky's great assets being a communicator, I suppose. And you pointed to that quote. Do you think that was a key moment when Volodymyr Zelensky? I think he was offered the opportunity to leave Ukraine. I think it was by the US, wasn't it? And he said, "I need ammunition, not a ride." That was a key moment, do you think?
Yeah, indeed, it was a key moment. Even though, even without President Zelensky staying in Kiev and leading the nation, Ukrainians would fight, because we. Ukrainian nation is a bit, let's say, there are some specific things about us, and one of the most important things that we were skeptical about anyone in the office of president or in the office of the prime minister. Because before that, in our history, we've been occupied either by the Soviet Union or Moscow, and actually the Russian rule, but communist rule. And before that, it was in Russian Empire. So Ukrainians were skeptical and suspicious about anyone who gets into the office. And we are not happy with any president the next day he is elected. So that's why Ukrainian nation was ready to fight, even if Zelensky would have decided to be evacuated. But he has done a great job of United Nations by his and leading by his example. So that's why, yes, it's one of the key things that is driving the whole motion of the people. What is interesting? The recent opinion poll by a rating group of it's in Ukrainian opinion poll company. 75% of Ukrainians feel pride about Ukraine and what's going on here. 95% believes in Ukrainian victory, and it's rise from 56% in January. So it's combined. The image of Ukraine, certainly in Zelensky, is a sort of a part of the image. Some people call him the Ukrainian Churchill, even though I think it's not a right comparison for a lot of reasons. But anyway,
why is that? Why is that, Alexander? Why is that not the right comparison?
Just I love British history, and certainly even though. I'm critical about my president, so I don't want to make him as a sort of icon.
You think that it's okay that that even in this intense moment of war and a need for sort of national unity and to rally around that figure, that it is okay and right and perhaps important, in fact, to still remain critical of Zelensky if necessary?
Well, yeah, sure. It's in our blood to be critical about and that's why we have experienced three revolutions, because there was the first one in the 90s when we ousted the communist government, and certainly there was an Orange Revolution in 2005 and the Revolution of Dignity in 2014. So it's just in our blood to be critical of anyone, and we don't want to have this sort of, well, I don't want to offend you, but we don't have any kings above us. So we believe that Ukrainians are a free nation, and we want to have the sort of a manager who is hired by the nation and then fired after he has not fulfilled his promises or whatever. So that's why we don't want to make him an icon, even though in the West he is so popular, and it was absolutely amazing to see how the Westerners are meeting with him. And recently, I just was amazed that it seems to me that some people were just attending the summit with Zelensky just to shake his hand and to convey support of their nation to him, which is good. So we're benefiting from it, but we don't want to have him as an icon.
That's very interesting. Let's talk more broadly about the West then, Alexander, and you touched on it a little bit there. And one point in particular that sort of I think is worth us reflecting on at this moment is a year ago, around about now, probably sort of today, 26th of February, as we find ourselves, the announcement of sanctions against Russia was in full flow. Economic, financial sanctions, businesses pulling out, removing Russia from really important financial institutions in an effort to try to thwart the war effort, to financially strangle Vladimir Putin and the war effort. There was this idea that Putin simply wouldn't survive that the people around him wouldn't stand for it, that there would be so much pain brought on the country and on, I suppose, financing the war effort as well, that it wouldn't last, that he wouldn't be able to carry through. And yet here we are a year later. Those sanctions will have done something. Have they done enough?
In 2014, when Russia firstly invaded Ukraine by an illegally annexing Crimea and starting the proxy war in Donbass, there was a, let's say, tiny package of sanctions related to Crimea. And the West was was pretending that it's a sort of a civil war in Ukraine going on, and Russia is just helping so-called separatists. Actually, I'm from Donetsk region; it's my native city, and I know from the beginning it was the Russian special forces, Russian intelligence, and the Russian soldiers who were fighting against us and who started this devil's machine of war. So if the West could have imposed sanctions there, the Russians would not have enough resources to wage this war, full-fledged war in 2022. So that's why, answering your question, the West has done a great job, but it was a bit late. Secondly, there was a misperception of Russia. The Russians can bear a huge price of war because they have this cult of death. They have this cult of the personality, the Führer of Russian world, and they are ready to sacrifice because they live miserable life in general. I'm not talking about big cities and this tiny layer of the middle class people who fled Russia after the mobilization was announced. But in general, the West just get Russia wrong. Their intentions after the 1991, and yesterday I read a couple of cables of communication between Bill Clinton at that time, the U.S. president, and Boris Yeltsin. And Boris Yeltsin was talking to Bill Clinton, just give us Europe, because we are Europeans. Europeans are not afraid of us. Just give us Europe and we will solve all those security problems. So this is a mindset of Russians. So they cannot, enjoy the life in their borders, internationally recognized borders. They're just dreaming about conquest. And Ukraine happened to be one of the toughest targets for them. And fortunately, with support of our Western partners, we can stop Russia and not to allow it to do some stupid things against some other neighbors who are members of the EU and NATO, which would trigger the Article 5 and possibly nuclear exchange. So that's why, it was too little too late, I would say. But anyway, it's, let's say, depleting Russian resources, even though Russia has enough money to wage a war for a year and a half or something, according to some estimates. Unfortunately, they have less and less, let's say, inflow of hard cash from oil and gas. But anyway, they still have enough, and they can bear this pain for quite a long period of time.
Right. Okay. So their tolerance for pain is high, you say. Alexander, just finally, if you will, and briefly, what kind of conversation will we be having, you and I, a year from now?
Well, I hope that we get everything we need to finish the job this year and to liberate Crimea as well. So it started in Crimea and it should end in Crimea. Without Crimea, regaining Crimea, there would be no possibility for Ukraine to secure its borders and actually even to develop our economy. And the whole world felt the pain of annexation of Crimea because Russia just cut our trade and including grain trade, and a lot of people in the world are suffering. So I would love to see Ukraine victorious. I would like to see the West and especially the old Europe, particularly Germany, changed completely its course and seeing the eastern neighbors not via the Moscow prism, but from the interests of first and foremost their Central and Eastern European allies and partners.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, I would like to see more united West, because Russia is a acute threat to Ukrainian and to European security. But what we see that China is turning in more aggressive and more aggressive, and the Ukrainian victory is something that might let's say prevent China from taking some drastic decisions with regard to Taiwan or some other neighbors that would trigger the let's say catastrophic scenario. So I would like to see Ukraine victorious, and actually it would be in interest of the Russian population as well, because only after the defeat in Ukraine, after restoration of Ukrainian territorial integrity and sovereignty, the Russian people would have possibility to concentrate on their problems and to change their leadership and to stream their resources into the well-being of Russians, not for the war efforts as we've seen now.